All right, Masechet Sukkah Daf Bet B'Shem Hashem Naaseh V'Nasliach. Very exciting to start this Masechet, especially as we'll plan to complete it just a few days, right? Just in time to build our Sukkot. Okay, the Masechet begins with the mitzvah of building the Sukkah itself, which is interesting, even though in the Torah, first it mentions the Arba Minim, lulav, and only then it says, and build a Sukkah. But we don't go in the order of the Pisukim, but it seems like it's in chronological order because first you're going to build the Sukkah even a few days before the holiday starts. So it makes sense to go in, like in Masechet Jama also went in chronological order starting from a week before Yom Kippur. All right, so we jump right into the details. Sukkah geboha lema'la me'asrim amma pesula. There is a maximum height of the sukkah. Now, obviously, if you read the Torah, you won't find any maximum height. The only thing I could think of as an analogy in the Torah is the Mishkan, but that is 10 amot high. The Bet HaMikdash of Shlomo is 30 amot high. So this is this is right in between. So we'll discuss, why, how we come to this maximum height. Why should there be a maximum at all? Anyway, if it's more than 20 amot, about 30 feet high, it would be pasul. According to Yehuda, it's okay. It can be even higher. It's totally fine. So we'll see the reasons for them. ושאינה גבוהה 10 טפחים ושאינה 3 דפנות ושחמתה מרובה מסילתה פסולה. If there's also a minimum height. If it's less than 10 tefachim, so about 3 feet, like the size of lower than a table, then it's no good. It's got to be at least that much. Then we'll get to that tomorrow, the next day, why the reason for the minimum height. And if it doesn't have 3 walls, also no good. And the word sukkah itself actually means something that provides protection, to protect, or shade. So therefore, if there's more sun than shade, it's no good. It doesn't have to be totally shade. It just has to be majority. Once it's a majority shade, so then we consider majority like the entirety. So that is the Mishnah, really just a list of a few basic rules. I want to show you an outline of what we're going to see on the daf today. We just saw 4 rules in the Mishnah. The first thing we're going to do is compare it to the first Mishnah in Masechet Eruvin, which has almost the same language and law as this Mishnah. So it makes a lot of sense to compare them. After that, we're going to list 3 sources or reasons for the maximum height of 20, Rabbah, Rabbi Zera, and Rava. And after we analyze those sources, we're going to give 3 arguments what's wrong with each of them. In other words, why the other 2 rabbis disagree with each of them and say something else. So that's the 3 reasons. After that, we're going to see 3 limitations on the Mishnah, all in the name of Rav, that this machloket only applies in a given circumstance, but not in other circumstances. So we'll see 3 opinions, and we'll correlate these 3 opinions with the three reasons and sources that we had before to see if they correlate. Then we'll give 3 arguments regarding those 3 limitations, and we'll end off with a final proof from the Sukkah, the famous Sukkah of Helene, the queen. So that's it. You see, there's a lot of lists of 3s. So that's definitely a theme that will run throughout. Okay, we begin with the first Mishnah in Masechet Eruvin. It says, Tanan hatam mavoy, shu gaboa me'asrim amay yema'et, Rabbi Yehuda omer eno sarich. Mavoy is something that joins many courtyards, similar to an eruv. Just like eruvim, we have our own courtyards. We join them together with a shared meal. So too, if you have many courtyards and you want to carry within them, and there's an alleyway that joins all the courtyards, so too you'd have a shared meal. You put it in one of the courtyards. Now, in addition to the shared meal, you also have to put some kind of sign. And so here we have some pictures. Let me start at the beginning. This is a sukkah that's too high, right? That would be about 30 feet high, is no good. This is one that's too low, and this is one that doesn't have enough walls. So the sources. Okay, now mavoy, you has to, in order, in addition to the shared meal, has to have some kind of sign that separates the alleyway with the reshut harabim. Reshut harabim, the street over here, is deoraita, so you cannot carry there no matter what. Now, people who are inside and carrying from one courtyard through the alleyway to the other courtyard, they might look around and say, oh, look, I'm carrying outside, and mistakenly pass this threshold and carry into the Shut Harabim. Therefore, midrabanan, they require a sign that's either a pole called a lechi or a korah, which is a horizontal beam. Now, this horizontal beam, if that's what you're going to use, has to be under 20 amot. 20 amot or less. If it's higher than 20 amot, then you got to bring it down. According to Tanakama, Rabbi Yehuda says it's totally fine. It can be even higher. So this is really interesting that you have our Mishnah and the Mishnah in Eruvin that have the same two opinions, right? And about the height of the schach or the height of the mavoy. So there's something parallel, and so it's very appropriate to compare the two. So we're going to start off with a linguistic question. How come in our Mishnah and Sukkah it says if you have any of these things, first it says pisula, and these things also pisula. The Sukkah is invalid. But in the other one, in Masechet Eruvin, it says yema'et, right? Make it lower, which seems like a nicer language, right? Kind of constructive criticism. Instead of giving you a fail, right? The teacher can say, hey, just fix this, right? So what's the difference between the language and the two? Even though it's the same law, so there's no substantive difference. And we're going to have two answers. One, Sukkah de oraita tane pisula, mavoy de rabanan tane takanta. Since the law of a Sukkah is de oraita, the fact that you have to have a sukkah deoraita, and the rabbis are defining what it is, but it's essentially a deoraita law. Therefore, it's in and of itself, it is pasul, right? It's of its essence. Whereas mavoy, the whole thing is the rabbanan. So what are you going to say? It's invalid, right? It's not intrinsically invalid the way a sukkah is intrinsically invalid. It's only the rabbanan. So just fix it, right? It's easier to say, oh, wait, to fix it. Okay, that's answer number one. The second one, which is even a simpler reason, even for a doraita, you could say, here's how to fix it. So you could have written yema'et for both. Mihu sukkah de nefish milta pasik vetane pesula. Regarding a sukkah, we had 4 different laws in our Mishnah. So how are you going to write the Mishnah? If it's too high, make it lower. If it's too low, make it bigger. If there's 2 walls, add another wall, right? If it's too much sun, so it's very wordy, right? And the Mishnah always likes to be concise. Remember, it was memorized. So it's much easier just to say, pasul, it's invalid. You can figure out how to fix it. Because of that, but the Mishnah in Eruvin, even though Eruvin has a lot of other details that go on later in that Masechet, as many of us learned, but that Mishnah itself only has one simple law. So it's just as easy to say Yema'et as to say Pasul. So good, that's a nice simple answer. Okay, this is typical of opening sugyot of most Masechtot. Start off with a kind of intro that is often a linguistic matter. You can imagine the rabbis in the yeshivot of old would introduce the Masechet with something like this. You notice we didn't quote any Amoraim yet, so this is all anonymous. Okay, and now we get to the heart of the matter. What is your source that a sukkah that's more than 20 amot high is invalid? Answer number 1, Amar Rabbah. Rabbah is a 3rd generation Babylonian Amora. Amar Kera, Leman yeda'u dorotechem ki basukot hoshavti et bnei Israel. Right, this is from Parashat Emor. Right, the main reason why we sit in the sukkah is so that the generations will know that Hashem had us sitting in Sukkot when we left Egypt during the desert, and that's a sign of God's providence. Either it's physical Sukkot, we'll just leave with that, or it could be the clouds of glory. Okay, anyway, Adesrim Amma, Adam Yodeya Shudar Basukah. Rabbah's focusing on the word Laman Yedeu. You have to know that you're sitting in a Sukkah. It's not enough to just be sitting in it. You have to be aware. So if it's 20 amot or less, the schach, then you're aware. You see it, you look up and you see it. But if it's higher, למעלה מ-20 אמה, אין אדם יודע שדר בסוכה, משום דלה שאתה בה עיינה. Higher than that, he doesn't even know he's sitting in the sukkah because your eye does not naturally go so far up, right? Just an architectural detail. So therefore, it has to be within a regular sight that if you're kind of looking straight, you're aware of the sechach on top of you. And notice something interesting, that Rabba's words are all in Hebrew, except for the last 5 words, right? The reason, because your eye does not catch sight of it. It seems that the last part in Aramaic, I would guess, might be a later Stam, the anonymous editors of the Bavli are adding it to Rabba's words. It's a good explanation. I agree with it, right? But it's interesting that the switch from Hebrew to Aramaic may indicate a further explanation of Rabbah, because Rabbah, the Hebrew words don't really explain. Well, why 20? Why would that make a difference? Oh, because your eye is not going to catch it. Okay, that's answer number 1, is the pasuk in Leman Yedeu. Answer number 2, Rabbi Zera, same generation as Rabbah, but from Eretz Yisrael. He says, Amar mehacha, v'sukkah tiyeh lesel yomam mechorev. He's going to learn from pasuk in Yeshaya. This is interesting because we don't usually learn halachot from Nevi'im. But the pasuk there says that a sukkah, I think he's just following the definition of the word sukkah. It says the word sukkah there, and it will serve as shade during the day from heat. So what do we see from here? That the purpose of a sukkah is to provide shade. עד 20 אמה אדם יושב בסל סוכה. למעלה מ-20 אמה אין אדם יושב בסל סוכה, אלא בסל דפנות. If it's 20 or lower, then the sechach is providing shade for you. If the sechach is higher than 20, then it's the walls that are providing shade, right? Unless the sun is exactly immediately directly above, right? For that, except for that minute, it's the walls that are providing shade. So therefore, has to be lower, right? We're going to see, the Gemara is going to say this actually depends on the ratio, because if you have like remember the old Sharet Zion sukkah, it was the whole parking lot, right? So then it could be really even higher, and you still get a good angle. So the Gemara will discuss that.
Is there a restriction
to width? It can be as wide as you can. There is a minimum width, which we'll see. Now.
He should have saved that proof for the that has to be shade more than sun. That would have been
right.
He should have used that
for
Yeshaya.
Right, and exactly. So everyone agrees that it has to provide shade. His point is the shade has to come from the schach specifically, and not just from the walls. Amar le Abaye. Now Abaye challenges Rabbi Zera. Ele me'ata oseh sukkato ba'ashtarot karnayim. Hachin nameh delahav sukkah. Let's say you make your walls. This is a place. It seems to be on the other side of the Jordan, in Jordan somewhere. It's called Ashterot Karnayim, 2 horns. This was a valley between 2 mountains, and we have a picture of it. Here's just a tall, this is demonstrating the Bizera, right? If it's very tall sukkah, then you see the shade is only being provided up here and nothing down here. Here's the Ashterot Karnaim, where you have a little sukkah between 2 cliffs. So you see, in this sukkah, the Bizera, would you say that this is pasul, even if it's just a regular height, right? Because the schach is not providing shade. It's the walls of the mountains that are providing shade almost the entire day. So would you say that this is pasul because it has to be the schach and not anything else? That's a good question. Amarle, he can answer it. Hatam dal ashterot karnaim ikasel sukkah. Hacha dal defanot lekasel sukkah. Over there, if you take away the mountains, then you have the shade comes from the roof. In other words, potentially, at least it comes from the roof. But whereas here, if you take away the walls, then there's not going to be any shade at all. In other words, there's a difference between something that's part of the structure of the sukkah, right, and something that's not part of the structure. If it's just outside things and happens to be that's providing shade, I don't worry about that. I'm just focusing on the structure of the sukkah and its material. And therefore, I need that the sukkah itself has to be of such a shape that the roof, at least a lot of the time, will be providing the shade. I don't worry about mountains that happen to be there or not be there. Okay, so that's a good enough answer. Now, Vedava. Now this is the third opinion, Why can't be more than 20 amot? This is Rava with an aleph. He's fourth generation Amorav from Bavel, not unlike Rabbah, which was the first opinion. So don't get confused between them, who was the third generation. So Rava Amar, Mehacha, Pasukot Teshevu Shib'at Yamim. This is the pasuk right before the one that Rabbah cited. This is the main mitzvah. And so you have to sit in it for 7 days. He's going to read this not only as a length of time, but also as an adjective, that you should sit in a sukkah that's a 7-day type of sukkah, meaning, Amra Torah, Kol Shibat Hayamim, Se Medirat Keba, Veshe Bedirat Arai. For 7 days, leave a permanent home dwelling and sit in a temporary residence. In other words, it has to be not only that you're there for 7 days, has to be built as a temporary residence, has to look like a tent or a booth. And so, עד 20 אמה אדם עושה דירתו דירת ארעי. למעלה מ-20 אמה אין אדם עושה דירתו דירת ארעי, אלא דירת קבע. When something is short, so you could use flimsy walls, flimsy material, and that it would look like a tent. If it's going to be more than 30 feet high, more than 20 amot, then you're most likely going to use bricks, metal, right, and make it look like it's going to be a permanent residence, right? So the point is, it has to look like it can't look like a palace with high ceilings. It's going to look like something small, and so it's just not good for the definition of what a sukkah is. Okay, so that's the three different opinions, all very interesting. You see, Rava is the latest one. Rava is the most conceptual and can have ramifications for other things, like about the material, right? It has to be built as a temporary residence. In my humble opinion, I think Rabbah, the first Rabbah, is the Peshat of the Mishnah because of the comparison to Mavoy, right? Mavoy does not have to give shade, the Korah on top. And it doesn't have to be a temporary residence. It's just sign, something that you have to see. And so since the Mishnah uses the same language there and here, it seems like that would make sense. That has to be something within eyesight, eye level, and that would be the reason. Okay, but so now we have all these three. Let's keep them straight because we're going to be referring to them often. First, we have a challenge to Rava by Abaye, that's his colleague, also fourth generation. Amar Abaye, ele me'ata samech yesod shel barzel v'sikech al gaban hachinameh tela have sukkah. He says, according to you, let's say you make the walls out of metal and you put schach on top. Would you say that it's no good because you made it like a permanent dwelling by making metal walls, right? And so according to you, since you're conceptualizing as a temporary dwelling, that should apply to everything, and you should know you can't use metal. You have to, only use tent material. So Amale hachi ka'amina lach ad 20 ama dadam ose dirato dirat arai ki abid le dirat keba name nafek. למעלה מ-20 אמה דאדם עושה דירתו דירת קבע כי עבד לדירת ארעי נמי לה נפק. So Rava will answer him and say, here's what I mean to say. 20 amot or less, where you can make it in a temporary way. So usually you make it a temporary way. If you're a little strange and you make it out of metal and brick, it's okay, right? Because the main thing, it still could be temporary. The main thing that we're focusing on is a roof. The roof has to be a temporary roof that lets in rain. It's not a very good roof. And so since it's under 20 amot, the usual way to build that is out of more temporary material. So we don't care about the unusual person. On the other hand, if it's going to be more than 20 amot, then a person generally is going to use more solid material, metal and bricks. So if a person happens to use a flimsy material, even though it's such a high ceiling, that's a strange guy. And so we don't have to worry about that strange person. In other words, Mishnah is giving a general rule for the most cases. And so therefore he's just defining it. Otherwise he's going to have to define every little thing. How about wood? How about paper? How about concrete? So this is a good overall general definition between temporary and permanent. Okay, now, so now we gave the three reasons. Now we're going to explain what's wrong with each of the reasons. How come the other two rabbis wouldn't like the other one? Rabbah, he learned it from Leman Yedeu Dorotechem. You have to know that you're sitting in a sukkah, and he learns that from the word Yedu, so you have to be aware of the schach. But they say that Leman Yedeu Dorotechem ki basukot Hoshavti, that's talking about that in future generations, you should remember that God had us sit in Sukkot, protected us with Sukkot back then. The Yedi'ah is about the history of Yetziat Mitzrayim and God's providence back then. That's the object of Yedi'ah. It's not about L'man Yedu'u, that you are now sitting in a Sukkah. So you're reading the verb wrong, and that's why they would disagree with it. Okay, so that's good. That's why they would prefer. I guess it'd be Zerah says, I don't like that pasuk. I'd prefer pasukim from Yeshaya, even though it's from Navi, over a pasuk in the Torah, because at least the one from Yeshaya is more directly defining what it is. Okay, so now we turn to the Bizera. How come the other two rabbis didn't agree? All agree with the Bizera. If you look in the context of Yeshaya chapter 4, it's all talking about in the future, Hashem, all things will be great. And the pasuk right before this said, God will create over the whole world a shrine, a meeting place of Mount Zion, cloud by day, smoke with a glowing flame by night, and over everything will hang a canopy. Al kol kavod chuppah. So first of all, there's a reference here to ananeh kavod that will return in the future. That's very interesting. And a chuppah of glory. And then the next pasuk compares that and says it will be Sukkah tiyeh lesel yomam. It sounds like it's comparing those clouds will be like a booth, like a sukkah that provides shade during the day, and so on. So you see, this pasuk is talking about the times, the future times. It's not describing an actual ritual sukkah that we use today. So therefore, it's not relevant to a sukkah. Okay, so that's a good point. That really is the context there. How would Rabbi Zerah defend himself? ורבי זרע, אם כן, למה קרא בחופה תהיה לסל יומם? מהי בסוכה תהיה לסל יומם? Shamat mina tarte. If it was just giving a comparison of something in the future that's going to be protective, it could have used the word chuppah, which in fact it does use in the pasuk before. From the fact that it uses the word sukkah, we can learn a definition of sukkah. So we can learn two things from it, both for the future and a definition right now. And that's actually perfectly legitimate. Whenever we want to know what a word means, we open up the concordance, we see where else. And even if there it's only a metaphor, nevertheless, a metaphor still has a definition, right? Still is comparing it to something we know. And so, yes, the sukkah has to provide shade, and therefore has to be low enough that it can provide shade. Good. So the Rabbi Zerah defended himself. And now the last one, Kerava nami la'amre. How come they don't all agree with Rava that it has to be a temporary dwelling, and so it has to be built on a lower so that it can be not so permanent? Mishum kushiyat Abaye. Well, they all have in mind the challenge of Abaye, that what about the walls, right? If you really think it has to be a temporary dwelling, then you should say that the walls have to be flimsy too. If the walls can be made out of iron, you said, generally under 20, well, actually most of our houses are less than 20. One floor houses are less than 20 amot, but we make them out of solid walls. So, all right, they because Abaye challenged it, not everybody agrees with it. All right, so now we understand the benefits of each one and the cons of each of the three opinions and why they would disagree.
Well, why is it that for the first one, the Rabbah proof, he doesn't defend himself at all? Like we just reject it and we say that's why they disagree with it, but the other ones, they each defend themselves.
Yes, that's a good point, right? That Rabbah does not defend himself. Maybe it was too hard to figure out a defense, or maybe it was obvious that you have to know that you're sitting in a sukkah. How are you going to remember that you were in Sukkot if you don't even know right now that you're sitting in a sukkah? The knowledge of the past depends on what you're doing right now in the present. But you're right. The Gemara does not give an answer for him. It only provides an answer for the others. Okay. And actually only applies an answer for the Bizera. It doesn't give an answer for Rava either.
Well, Rava was said previously because we said it with
right. He answered his own question earlier. Yeah. That's good. Okay, now Keman Azla Amar Rabbi Yoshia Amar Rav. Okay, just to introduce this, we're going to see three statements in the name of Rav. Now we're actually going backwards in time because the Amorim that we just quoted were in the third and fourth generation. Rav is a first generation Babylonian Amora. He learned directly with Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. He may have learned this very Mishnah from Rabbi Yehuda Nasi's mouth. And he has a tradition that the machloket in the Mishnah only applies to a limited case. And we're going to see three different formulations of what Rav taught. So let's see the first one in the name of Rabbi Yoshia. He says, "Machloket b'she'en defanot magiot lasechach." The machlok between Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda about if 20 higher than 20 is no good or it's okay. That only applies when the walls stop short. Right? We have a lot of sukkot where the wall might just be a bush or something low, right? As long as it's 10 tefachim high, we say good asik. The wall goes up to heaven. So if the walls stop short and don't reach the roof, then that's where Tanakama says less than 20 amot is no good. However, if the walls go up to the ceiling, then Tanakama would agree that even more than 20 amot is okay. Let's see if we have a picture here. Right, see, this is if they don't reach the top, then that's when it's no good. But if it would reach the top, then you can make it as high as you want. So Rav is now being more permissive and saying even Tanakama would permit in a regular sukkah that reaches the top. So so who does that follow? Of the three reasons that we just gave, which one would Rav follow? Now that's actually backwards because Rav is earlier than them. So we can ask the other way around. Those three opinions, which of them best fits with Rav's statement? Keman, the answer is Kerabah. דאמר משום דלה שעתה בעינה וכיוון דדפנות מגיעות לשיחך משלט בשעתה בעינה. It's the first opinion of Rabbah, and he says it's the reason that if it's too high, then your eye is not going to catch sight of it. But that's only true if it's empty space. However, if the wall goes all the way up, then you're going to say, hey, there's a wall here, and you're going to follow the wall all the way up to the top, and then you'll see the schach. Right, which makes perfect sense, and so therefore you see that Rabbah is the best explanation for this statement of Rav. So that this gives some proof for Rabbah because Rav is an authoritative source that comes before him. Incidentally, notice that the words that they cite from Rabbah are the Aramaic ones that I suggested are actually an explanation of Rabbah, not his actual words. Okay, but nevertheless, they're an accurate explanation. So I think that the Gemara before is anticipated this answer here and knew that we're going to need this explanation, and so that's why it added it to Rabbah's statement before, so that now you would be set up and say, oh yeah, because your eye wants to catch sight, so the walls continuing help you. Good. So that's formulation number one of Rabbi Yoshaya in the name of Rav. Here's number two. Keman azlahad amar Rav Huna amar Rav. The second one is in the name of Rav Huna, second generation student of Rav. Machloket b'she'en ba ela arba amot al arba amot. When does Tanakama say 20 amot is the maximum? Only when it's a small sukkah that's 4 by 4 amot wide. In other words, 6 feet by 6 feet. The minimum size of a room, like for laws of mezuzah, right? If it's a small room, then it's a ratio of 20 amot for 4 by 4 width. אבל יש בה יותר מ4 אמות, על 4 אמות, אפילו למעלה מ20 אמה כשרה. If it's a big sukkah, then you can make the roof even higher, right? It doesn't say how much higher. If it's 8 by 8, does that mean you can make it 40 amot? I don't know. We don't know the exact ratio, but the point is that the limitation is only on a small sukkah of 4 by 4. So Keman, which of the three reasons above align with this statement of this explanation of Rav? The answer is it's the second reason of the Bizera. He said it's because it has to provide shade. So if it's narrow and tall, then it's not going to provide much shade, right, in that ratio. But if you make it wider, then it will provide shade, as we can see from this picture here. This one is 20 amot tall, but look how wide it is. So you see that for a lot of the day, you'll be okay, and you'll still have shade provided by the schach. So that makes sense according to the Bizera, and it would not make sense according to the others. Okay, by the way, this is a nice little picture here in the Koran. They did some analysis and noticed that actually in Israel or Bavel, if you even a 4 by 4, wide by 20 would basically not get any sunlight overhead any time of the year. Unless you're at the equator, then this might work. Okay, so this is more of a theoretical calculation than an actual calculation. Good. Now, third formulation of Rav. Keman azlahada amarav Hanan barava amarav. So remember, there's three formulations of Rav. The first was Rabbi Yoshia. The second is Rav Huna. This third one is Rav Hanan in the name of Rav. Machloket she'ena mechazeket ela kedei rosho v'rubo v'shulchano. אבל מחזקת יותר מכדי ראשו ורובו ושולחנו, אפילו למעלה מ-20 אמה כשרה. It's similar to Rav Huna, but just a different minimum size, that the machloket, Tanakama says 20 amot and or more is no good. That only applies to a sukkah that is so small, it's the absolute minimum size, and it only can hold your head, most of your body, and your table. Then has to be 20 amot or less. But if it's bigger than that, we estimate this to be 7 tefachim, by 7 tefachim. And if it's bigger than that, then even Tanakama would agree that it can be higher. Whose opinion will this follow of the three reasons above? The answer is delak echad. It doesn't fit anybody, not the other two, not a bizera either, because with that thing so small and so high, even the sun is never going to come in. And so it's not going to even help if it's a little smaller or a little bigger, right? In that ratio, it doesn't help the sun. You're not going to see it. And so on. So it really doesn't make any sense. We cannot fit this with anyone. Here is a picture of that. See that when they were in the olden days, when they used to eat, they didn't eat on a chair, but reclining, like on Pesach. And so he could have a bed, and as long as most of his body, even if his legs are sticking out, are in it, and his table also. He needs the table because usually wherever your table is, you're gonna move towards the table. So that is the minimum size. Sometimes if you're traveling, these pop-up sukkot that are about that size, very cute. Okay, good. Now those are the three statements of Rav. I wonder, did Rav teach all three statements and they were just passed on by different people, or did he say one statement and we're not quite sure exactly what he said? You see, all three of them have a similar cadence. Machloket, be, this and that. But this, then more of them, right? So Rav said something like the machloket is in the minimum size, but otherwise not. So that's what we're going to analyze now. Can we try to put together any of these three understandings of Rav, formulations of Rav? The first opinion of Rabbi Yoshia, who says that the machloket is only when the walls stop short, but if they go all the way up, then it's fine. You can be higher. That is not the same. Certainly does not agree with Rav Huna and Rav Hanan barava. Those two opinions gave a shiur for the width, right? Either 4x4 or enough to hold the most of the person and his table. And so those are just different directions altogether. He did not give something about width. So his formulation is therefore fundamentally different from theirs. Ela Rav Huna v'Rav Hanan baraba nema bechsher sukkah kami palge. Maybe Rav Huna and Rav Hanan actually say the same thing in the name of Rav. Maybe Rav just said, this machloket only applies for the minimum width. But if it's more than the minimum width, then it can be higher. And they argue among themselves, what is the minimum width? That's the Rav Huna thinks that the minimum size sukkah is 4x4. And the other opinion is 7 tefachim by 7 tefachim to hold your body. But really, Rav didn't say either of those things. Rav just said the minimum, and they argue about what the minimum is. So this is a nice possibility. The Gemara now rejects it and just says, not necessarily so. Maybe that's a fundamental machloket even among those two. No, everyone agrees that the minimum size sukkah is in fact just your body, most of your body, 7 tefachim by 7 tefachim. And nevertheless, they disagree regarding the machloket. That the last opinion, Rav Hanan thinks that the Mishnah Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda are only arguing in the tiny sukkah. And if it's any bigger than that, then yes, it can be higher, which would actually be a kula, right? Because now for most sukkah, just make it a little bigger and you can make it higher. Rav Huna thinks that from the tiny sukkah until 4x4, that's the machloket. Throughout that whole thing has to be less than 20 in ratio. But more than 4x4, everyone agrees that it's okay. Okay, so the reason why we went back and forth on this is because we're going to discuss further the minimum width, right? And so we're kind of anticipating, wait, we're going to fit these into the boxes and limit them or not. Okay, so now I can go back to the outline and just review what we've seen so far. The Mishnah mentioned 4 different halachot. We're focusing today only on the first halakha of the height. We compared it with Mishnah and Eruvin. Okay, we gave 2 answers to that. We could leave that aside. We gave 3 different possible sources or reasons for it by Rabba, Rabbi Zera, and Rava. We explained why each of them would not agree with the others, so what's wrong with them. So that I call A1 and A2. And then we're actually going backward, chronologically backwards, right? I mean, if I was writing a dissertation on this, I would want to go in chronological order. Start with the Mishnah, and then the Rav, who says he has a limitation. The Mishnah machloket only applies in such a case, but not. And then I would go with the later Amoraim. But the Gemara doesn't present it in chronological order, but rather in a more effective teaching method is to give the reasons which are interesting, right? And then what's wrong with the reasons, so you really have to work with them. And then now I'm going to present you with a statement of Rav, and now you have to figure out, kind of working backwards, which one does this fit with or not fit with? So you can almost reconstruct the style of a rabbinic shiur from those times, how this would engage and challenge the students and makes it a lot more memorable, fun, engaging, and works their mind. So I think that explains the reason why it's out of chronological order. And so we have 3 formulations of Rav that we match up, more or less. 2 of them we match up. The third one we can't match up with any of them. And lastly, what we just saw were 3 arguments explaining that Rabbi Yoshia stands alone, and the other 2 potentially maybe they fundamentally agree with each other, but then we say no, they don't. They don't. These are 3 different formulations of Rav. Yet they all agree that the minimum size of a sukkah, independent of the height, is most of your body. Okay, and now we're going to end with a baraita, a somewhat famous baraita. Metibe, sukkah shehi geboha lema'ale me-20 amma pesula, ve'Rabbi Yehuda machshir ad 20 ve'50 amma. The beginning of this baraita is almost the same as our Mishnah. Tanakama says 20 and lower, 20 and higher is no good. Rabbi Yehuda says it's kasher, and what this baraita adds is even 40, even 50. Right, that's what it adds. Is there any limitation? Not clear. Okay, anyway, that's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Now, Rabbi Yehuda is going to give a proof for his opinion that you can have a very high sukkah from a story. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Maaseh beHeleni hamalka beLod. So Queen Helene, we've seen her in Masechet Yoma. Back then, she's the one that donated the chandelier and the golden tablet that had the parasha of Sotah on it. She was from a country called, if you look at some of the commentaries, they say she's a Hasmonean queen. She's not a Hasmonean queen. We know exactly who she is. She's mentioned in Josephus, and we even found her sarcophagus. It's right here.
What years?
This is at the end of the second Bet HaMikdash. It was like early 1st century CE. She was from a small country called Adyabene. It was part of the Parthian Persian Empire up in northern Syria. And she was acquainted with a rabbi who taught her and inspired her, and she converted to Judaism, along with her 2 sons, also converted to Judaism, and many of the other noblemen and maybe other citizens of the country. And she just loved the Jews. She supported the Bet HaMikdash, and she followed the sages' opinions and everything they did. She wanted to be buried in Jerusalem, and so she had a grave site built for her there, and that archaeologists have found. Okay, so she's a fascinating character. She spent 1 Sukkot in the city of Lod, a very ancient city and a modern city. So when she was there, Shaita Sukkata Geboha 120 amma. והיו זקנים נכנסים ויוצאים לשם, ולא אמרו לה דבר. So the Yehuda says, Heleni Amalka, she's a queen, so she's not going to sit in a little thing. She built a very high sukkah, and the rabbis came to visit her, and they came and left, and no one ever complained and said, Heleni, you have to bring it down a little. No one said that. So what do you see from there? The Yehuda says, I'm right. You're allowed to make a high sukkah. Okay, it's a pretty good proof. This is all part of the Baraita. The Chachamim tell him, Misham re'aya ishaita petura min sukkah. You know why they didn't complain to her? Because she's a woman. She doesn't have to sit in sukkah anyway.
She had no husband. There was no king.
Right, exactly. And so the rabbis, I guess, when they went, they wouldn't eat too much. She had 7 sons, and so they have better sons. They have to sit in the sukkah, don't they? And she wouldn't violate the opinion of Chachamim. She didn't follow the Sadducees or anybody else, right? She followed rabbinic law to the T. So there you go. See, it is a good proof. That's the end of the Baraita. Now we're going to first analyze the Baraita. Why does it say ve'od here? Why do you have to mention that she followed Chachamim? What's the difference? And what if she didn't? Doesn't everybody agrees you have to sit in the sukkah? So first we say maybe she had only little children who are peturim from a sukkah. Uktarim peturim min sukkah. No, that can't be. Since she has 7 children, even if she had all 7 in a row, nevertheless, one of them would have to be at least 5-6 years old, and the Chachamim require as chinuch, mitzvah chinuch, that even a 6-year-old has to sit in sukkah. As soon as a child no longer needs his mother, he doesn't say mommy every second, right? Then they already can understand and sit in the sukkah with their dad. And so those kids would have to sit in the sukkah. Maybe you'll say until they're bar mitzvah, they're only chayav midrabanan. Maybe she didn't follow the Rabbanan. She converted to Deoraita Judaism, right? And she didn't follow all the details of Rabbanan. No, Tashema ve'od kol ma'aseha lo aseta ela pi chachamim. She followed chachamim to the T. Therefore, even if you say she was a woman and she was petura, her husband, who knows, maybe he was in a different place, but she has her children with her. And her children are at least 6-7 years old and would have to be chayav midrabanan, at least in the sukkah. So you see, the Yehuda says, it's really, I have a good proof, and it should have been, if the fact that they didn't complain means that you're allowed to have it higher. Okay, that is the understanding of the Baraita. Now we're going to bring it home to what we just said. According to the first opinion of Rabbi Yoshaya, the first reason, right, that the machloket is that Tanakama only says it's a problem if the walls don't reach the top, right? Don't reach the top. If they reach the top, it's okay. So then it could be a case where they didn't reach the top. Mishum avira. Even a queen might make a sukkah that has half walls because it's nice and airy, right? It's more beautiful to have a sukkah like that. And therefore, since they didn't reach the top, that's why Chachamim should have complained and said, hey, they don't reach the top, and the thing is higher than 20 amot. This is a problem. So therefore, it would be a good proof, a challenge against Rabbanan that higher than 20 is okay, like the Yehuda. So the whole story makes sense according to the Bi Yoshia. However, but the other 2 opinions that say the machlok is only in a small sukkah, right? But if it's a bigger, wider sukkah, then yes, the roof can be higher. This is a queen. You think she's going to make a little tiny sukkah, right? Well, she wouldn't do that. It would be bigger, and therefore, since it's bigger, then the roof is allowed to be higher, even according to Chachamim, and therefore, this would not be any challenge from Rabbi Yehuda to Chachamim. That is the challenge to those 2 opinions. Answer: Amar Rav Ada lo nisracha ela sukkah asuya kitoniyot. Maybe it was a special kind of sukkah that was, yes, it was very wide, but had many small cubbies, right? Small subdivisions, each one of which was less than 4x4 or less than 7x7 tefachim. So it would still be a queenly sukkah, but it's nevertheless, because each had many sections, it would the height could not be so high. All right, that's a good try, but what kind of queen? That's not a grand sukkah. If everybody's sitting in their own little cubby, sounds like little jail cells. What is that? No, it was talking about a sukkah that had two sections. One big section where lots of people would sit, and it had other side areas that were little rooms. And when they asked the challenge, it was about the little rooms. How come the rabbis didn't complain about the little rooms? The roof should be smaller. And so that was Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. But Rabbanan Sabre, Baneha besukkah ma'al yahavu yatbeh. The sons who were 6 and older, they were sitting in the big area section. In the big section, that's okay. The height could be even higher, right, than 20 amot because it's wide. The queen herself, she was sitting in the little section because she's sanua, right? So even though she's the queen, she's going to be in a separate section. She has a mechitza. Anyway, she's a woman, doesn't matter. And that's why they didn't tell her anything, because it's totally fine. The sons were in the big part, and the big part can be higher. Rabbi Yehuda, his challenge was based on the assumption that her sons are going to be sitting with her in the little, let's say 4x4 sections. You can still fit a few people in there, right? And then they are chayavim, at least midrabanan. And nevertheless, they didn't tell her anything. That's how you could prove that even a small sukkah can be higher. Whereas Rabbanan assumed that the children were in the big area, and she herself was in the small area, and the big area can be. And so now we can explain this baraita according to all of the three explanations that we gave for the law of 20 amot. Baruch Adonai le'olam, amen ve'amen.